So this next video then is for Unit 9, Handle Information in Care Settings. Now again, this is a combined unit, so there's going to be some knowledge, so some written questions and answers, and then there'll be an observation or two from your assessor, just to make sure you're competent at handling information. But all I want you to do is the knowledge part of it. So this video is going to help you with how to produce evidence to meet the assessment criteria for the underpinning knowledge. 1.1 asks you to identify the legislation that relates to the handling, the storing and the disposing of information in care settings. So you're going to have to do some independent research, have a look or research into those legislations and identify the key points of them and explain how they relate to your own job role. So I would expect some research or some written work into the General Data Protection Regulations of 2018. Research that legislation, look at that key points and explain what it means you have to do in your work role in order to comply with GDPR. You also want to look at the Data Protection Act of 2018 since its revision when the GDPR came into place. So look at that Data Protection Act and look at the key points and look at how we are lawfully supposed to handle data and record data and dispose of or transfer that data. Look at what the expectations of the Data Protection Act 1998 are. Also look into the Freedom of Information Act 2000. Look at what that legislation states in order to make sure that information isn't given freely and unlawfully. So do some research into those three key legislations, identify the key points and write about them. 1.2 asks us to identify and explain why it's important to have secure systems of work in place for the recording and storing of information. So you've just learnt in 1.1 that it's important to follow these legal obligations, these legal expectations. So if you've got those secure systems in place, you can demonstrate and evidence that you're meeting those legal obligations, that you aren't giving information out freely, that you're upholding confidentiality agreements, that you're only allowing people to have access to the information that's authorised. So you aren't breaching data protection, you aren't breaching GDPR, you aren't breaching the Freedom of Information Act. So these secure systems prevents that. It prevents unauthorised access, it prevents a data breach, it prevents the breach of confidentiality, it prevents the sharing of information unlawfully without consent. So why do we have secure systems in place for the recording of and the storing of? So think about manual records, so your written records. What systems have you got in place for that? So you've probably got a locked filing cabinet in a lockable room where only certain people have access to them through keys, so they are authorised to hold keys. Your electronic records may be password protected. Your emails may be encrypted with passwords. You might have a backup system in place to prevent any data loss. So what secure systems have you got in place at work and why are those important? So to meet 1.2, just explain that. 2.1 asks you to describe where to access information, advice and guidance about handling information. Now, in any workplace, there will always be a policy and procedure that will give you excellent information about how to handle information in your work setting and the correct procedure to follow. But if you're unsure or don't know how to access those policies and procedures, speak to a colleague, speak to the person in charge, speak to your manager. They're full of information and they can support you to understand how to store, handle, dispose and record of information correctly. If you're new to the role, speak to other colleagues, ask them how they do it, shadow existing staff. You may need to go on the Skills for Care website and look at your codes of professional conduct, look at that codes of professional practice and read about what's expected of you in order to maintain confidential records, in order to maintain data protection. So where can you go to, who can you ask, what can you read that will give you additional information, advice and guidance about what to do when handling information in your own work practice. So think about the people you've spoke to, think about the stuff you've read, and to meet 2.1, just write about them. 2.2 asks you to explain what actions you'd take when there's concerns over the recording, storing and sharing of information. So we've already learnt that we've got a policy and procedure that we have to follow. There will be a procedure and a policy on reporting concerns. So have a read of that and look at the measures you take when you've got concerns. We know that concerns need to be raised with our manager. You may need to put something in writing regarding those concerns. But for you yourself, you may need additional training. Look at what training you've had and request additional training if you feel that you've got particular concerns and don't know how to handle information safely. For others, they may not have read that policy. They may not have the knowledge that you've got. You may need to point them to that policy or procedure or signpost them to additional training. So what do you do when there's concerns? What's the procedure for reporting concerns in your own workplace? Have a look at your policy, have a look at procedure, tell me who you'd go to and what you'd do in the event that you'd got particular concerns when someone may be unlawfully sharing information, breaching confidentiality. What were you going to do about it and who do you need to speak to?